on the issues that matter to Texas. We've been at the forefront of tax reform, eminent domain, criminal justice, 10th Amendment, healthcare, fiscal, education, and so many others. But when the idea arose that we might, maybe, get involved in immigration, I must admit that we all paused. The issue is so very contentious, the problems are intractable, and the emotions run so very high. And yet, after we paused, we were compelled. Is this not, we asked ourselves, precisely the sort of chronic, failed Washington, D.C. policy that would benefit from a Texas perspective and, more importantly, a Texas solution? Is this not an issue demanding solutions that break with a status quo that has not worked for decades? And is this not an issue that needs insights and inputs that cut across the usual divides? Most important, is this not an issue that directly affects Texas and the Texas future? After all, we have the longest state border with Mexico. After all, we actually have a long and instructive history on immigration. And after all, we will be a plurality Hispanic state in a decade. That, in brief, is the genesis of this, for us, a pretty big deal, to have a lunchtime event and debate. My friends, for the first time in Texas Public Policy Foundation's history, we will talk immigration in a big way. And in this conversation, I am so proud to have with us many great people from Texas and beyond. And starting off with his own remarks on this very important issue is my great friend, Agriculture Commissioner Todd Staples. You all know Commissioner Staples. He was elected to a second term as the leader of the Department of Agriculture and understands it is the private sector that creates jobs and allows the economy to grow. Commissioner Staples has helped lead the charge toward eminent domain reform and has challenged the Obama administration to allocate resources to secure the border. Commissioner Staples has authored the book Broken Borders, Broken Promises, due out next month, and the book provides conservative, practical approaches to secure the border and reform our failed system. And of course, my boss, Wendy Graham, said I couldn't mention the Cotton Bowl anymore, so I won't. I'm a little sad about that. But I will mention that Commissioner Staples is a fighting Texas Aggie and a former state FFA officer. So please help me welcome Commissioner Staples.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, without a doubt, America's immigration and guest worker program is antiquated, it's outdated, it's dilapidated, let's face it, it's broken. And we know that numerous reform measures have been proposed only to be met with failure. Attacks from both the left and the right have successfully derailed congressional action for too long, and states, frustrated with Washington's inability to agree on fundamental reforms, have passed various forms of legislation, all met with mixed results, and clearly they're inadequate to fully address what fundamentally requires federal legislation. And while Washington continues to posture and postpone, states, our businesses, our local communities, and our economy continues to suffer. This issue came into clear and sharp focus for me one night almost a couple of years ago, flying in a DPS helicopter, radioing to Border Patrol on the ground who were seeking to apprehend suspects. The grim reality is no one knew in the dark of night if the target was an armed and dangerous drug cartel member or a job seeker violating our entry laws. If our state, federal, and local law enforcement officials, who, by the way, are doing a tremendous job with the resources they have, could focus on the violently treacherous drug cartels who have grown more defiant and deadly as they take advantage of our porous southern border, what a force multiplier that would be. We could effectively use taxpayer dollars, and the end result would protect landowners and restore the sovereignty of the United States of America. But that's not what I saw flying through the dark of night with our fine troopers. I saw what they see every day. that all too often in darkness our law enforcement assets are stretched trying to do their best. By mitigating the flow of illegal entries to those seeking to fill the want-ads of American businesses, we can regain operational control of our border. Now, Texas and America needs a workforce. Even in light of the difficult recession and high unemployment rates across our nation, I'm telling you, no one was relocating to the Rio Grande Valley to pick grapefruit. Articles document that California strawberries are going unpicked and Washington apples dropped to the ground because of too few workers. The simple fact is, from agriculture to construction to hospitality, our country is not producing the workforce necessary to meet the market demands of our economy. This phenomenon is not new, nor is it peculiar to the United States. Our competitor to the north, Canada, currently has an ongoing aggressive effort aimed at bringing in more workers. Now, we know that Texans are pro-job, we're pro-business, we're pro-economy, we're pro-security, and therefore I believe Texans are pro-legal immigration. I must say that I also believe every American who wants a job should be first in line to get that job, but folks, the lines are not forming. As a result of America is home to a shadow economy enabled by an outdated guest worker program that is based on artificial quotas that have no relationship to market forces, which has yielded an undocumented population estimated to range between 11 and 20 million people. Our country needs leadership, and Texas is in a unique position and has a unique perspective to shape, guide, prod, and even pull this national debate. With our state being home to nearly 2/3 of our entire southern U.S. border, with Texas having one of the fastest growing populations, with Texas being a national leader in job growth, with Texas being a national and top producer of food and fiber, with Texas having the second largest population of undocumented workers, and with Mexico being the #1 trading partner for the Lone Star State, who better than Texas to play this role in developing, debating, and delivering tangible solutions to our country's immigration stalemate? As citizens, as representatives, as policymakers of a state, we know firsthand that individual states understand best how to thoughtfully address our nation's most difficult policy challenges. Whether we like it or not, though, the federal government does have jurisdiction over immigration policy. But just because Congress holds the power to immigration reform does not mean that the states, and Texas specifically, should not lead the charge to finally act, ladies and gentlemen. States are the best incubator to develop and demand national reform, and like so many issues on this one, Texas must lead the charge. For too long, immigration policy has been viewed through the lens of a political chessboard, pawns for one party's gain and another's loss. And while the president may continue to play political chess seeking maximum gain, I know as Texans, we can lead on this critical issue and craft solutions guided by free market principles, not cheap political leveraging. In short, solving this challenge will require market-based solutions, not government-mandated quotas, and our chances of success will only be limited by our commitment to principle and political courage. The panel that you're about to hear will offer solutions to the obstacles that have derailed much-needed reform. I hope that they will answer tough questions, and I believe that they will. I believe they will answer questions like, do we really believe people are coming here illegally today seeking citizenship, or are people coming here looking for a job? Do we really want to grow a government big enough to round up 11 million people? Or are we going to make the mistakes of past amnesty that have perpetuated the problem to where we are today? How do we get organized labor to loosen its opposition to revamping our visa programs that result in encouraging the illegal entry of job seekers? And are we going to allow the conversation to be hijacked by those seeking partial solutions to maximize political gain? Mr. President, and you, the audience, will have to determine if you Texans are going to take the lead and solve the issue of our day. And as you do, keep in mind the words of Dr. Walter Williams, distinguished professor of economics at George Mason University, when he wrote, "Compassionate policy requires dispassionate analysis. Policy intentions and policy effects often bear no relationship to one another." Brooke, thank you. Thank the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your leadership for the Lone Star State.
He said he had to restrain himself not to say gig 'em. He's a much better man than I. So thank you, Commissioner Staples. That was extraordinary, and I think perfectly set up the discussion we're going to have. If I could ask the panelists to go ahead and take their seats, and while they're at the front, up there, here they come. First though, let me officially welcome back such a great friend, Steve Moore of the Wall Street Journal and multiple appearances on Fox and CNN. Help me welcome Steve. Steve, of course, most of you know because you've seen him on TV and you certainly read his editorials in the Wall Street Journal, but he has been on the front end of this, not necessarily immigration, but the ideas debate and fighting for freedom and for this country for a really long time. I first met him about 12 years ago, and he is truly one of the most dedicated people to making our country better that I know, and I'm so grateful that he's here and joined us. And I'm going to turn it over to Steve to now introduce the rest of the panel. Again, please help me welcome our immigration panel.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Brooke, thank you very much for inviting me to this one cradle of freedom in America. I love coming to the great, great state of Texas. I've written pretty extensively in my career on immigration, and I couldn't agree more that this is maybe the most important issue confronting our country today. You know, the great historian Oscar Hamlet once wrote a book on the history of immigration to America, and she started out the book by saying, I was going to write a book about the history of immigration to America, and then I discovered that the history of America is the history of immigration. And so this is a critical issue for our economy, for our culture, for our political system, and Washington just hasn't come up with the solutions, right? I think everyone can agree that Washington has fumbled the issue on this critical issue. Well, the one thing I would like everyone to keep in mind as we talk and debate this issue over the next hour or so is that the way I like to put it is, I will know that we are an empire in decline, and I do not believe we're anywhere near that, when you've got 20 million people trying to get out of the United States rather than trying to get into the United States. And that is the one indication that we are still a beacon of freedom for the rest of the world. And we've put together just a fantastic panel of people with different opinions about how we proceed on this. We want to keep this discussion primarily focused on the economics and policy implications of immigration. We'll probably get a little bit into the politics of it because that's important too. But I think we really want to focus on what are the right courses of action in terms of both legal and illegal immigration going forward. And because I believe in ladies first, let me introduce our first panelist, and I'll introduce everyone individually before they speak. We'll start with Linda Vega. Linda has previously worked with the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, the American Foreign Service Association. She is an expert on immigration and Latino issues. And most importantly, Linda is the founder of Latinos Ready to Vote, which is an organization dedicated to promote naturalization, voter registration, and conservative issues among Latinos in Texas and across the nation. So, Linda, we're very eager to hear your thoughts on this very important issue.
Thank you. Immigration law is one of the most complex areas to practice, enforce, and pass policy in. If you can imagine, on one side there's an employment-based visa with quotas, on the other side family-based with quotas, and in the middle is this much coveted legal permanent residency and citizenship that everyone wants to go and achieve. In 1987, it really was the first time that we passed amnesty. And in that course, almost 3 million, 2.73 million people were allowed to receive their residency. Given that there were 5 million people undocumented in the US, the population that was left over was a failure of residual bad policy. They encountered problems in applying for family unification. They encountered various other problems for achieving that economic prosperity that they were promised. It was the first time that we encouraged people to apply for a waiver that would allow them to stay in the United States or reunify with their family, that emphasized on the negative. On the hardship, they could prove financial difficulty, physical difficulty. All the negatives were a way for them to achieve their residency. We didn't focus on the positive: education, businesses, paying taxes, owning homes. We then began to condition people. If you say that you are in dire straits, you will be given a pathway to get to the United States. That didn't go over well. Between 1998 and 2001, we tried again. We started to pass waivers. We allowed the Life Act that encouraged learning English, passing certain regulations that would allow them to stay. They applied for these job visas, knowing that they weren't able to get them for numerous years, 8 to 15 in some cases. We opened up visas for the high-skilled workers, but capped it at 90,000 when possibly the need was greater. Those quotas for the unskilled laborers were about 66,000, and it remains as such. Families, again, were conditioned that if they could prove extreme hardship now, they could enter the United States or they could apply to stay with their family. Again, we conditioned people on the negative rather than on the positive. And thus created, or started to create, this deluge of people coming into the United States to reunify with their families. And now we were at 8 million. So even currently, we have H-2B visas, which are seasonal visas, but they're at 66,000 per year, when our demand for unskilled labor is much greater. So we've gone from 1987 to 5 million undocumented, attempted to cure that. We went to 2000, the year 2000, with 8 million, attempted to cure that, and the residuals have fallen down to possibly 11 million or more. What we should be looking at, if we are serious in curtailing that number from increasing, is the waiver policy. We are punishing people to want to come reunify with their families if they're outside the United States, or to stay in the United States to be the head of household and provide for their family by rewarding those extreme hardships rather than those benefits or those equities to our economy. But also on the economic point, we're rewarding people in the high-skilled level, but the demand for unskilled labor keeps growing and growing, and the visa availability is just not happening. So if we are looking for a solution, we should look at the language in previous policies so that we don't follow the same mistakes. And we should open up that quota based on the market necessity of what type of worker is actually needed in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Congressman Casero, and I've really been looking forward to meeting you for a long time, sir, so it's a great pleasure to make your acquaintance and to be on this panel with you. Congressman Casero represents Texas' 20th Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives in the San Antonio region. Congressman Casero worked in the Texas legislature for 5 terms, as many of you know. He served as vice chairman of the Higher Education Committee for 4 years. He tells me that in the U.S. House of Representatives, he's been appointed to the Foreign Services, Armed Services and Foreign Affairs. Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committee. So please welcome one of the new stars of the new Congress, Congressman Casero.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moore, and thank you, Ms. Rollins, and to the TPPF for hosting this policy forum and specifically for trying to tackle the issue of immigration. It's good to see many of the colleagues that I served with, both Democrats and Republicans, in the Texas legislature for so many years. I don't have to tell anybody in this room that immigration is one of the hottest topics, not only in Austin, but also in Washington in 2013. Particularly after the November election, there's been a lot of momentum by the American people to our federal government to do something on the issue of immigration. And I hope that as we try to come to a solution, and I think that I would be very surprised and disappointed if the federal Congress did not act on comprehensive immigration reform in the year 2013. And I hope that we can do it in a bipartisan way, a thoughtful way, one that meets the needs of the nation and also respects the history of our nation as a nation of immigrants. We know, for example, that there are approximately 11 to 15 undocumented immigrants in the United States. That's not a fact that makes anybody in our country happy. The fact that folks came here and were not documented, came here illegally. At the same time, it's a reality of our nation. And this is not an issue that is only a present tense issue. It's one that the United States of America has faced in many times before, whether it was the Germans or the Irish or the Italian, the many European immigrants who've come here, Chinese immigrants who have come here, in the 1990s, Haitian immigrants who have come to the United States. This is an issue that is not here for the first time, and I suspect is not here for the last time. But the question for us is, how do we come to a constructive solution? I believe that we ought to pursue comprehensive immigration reform, and I want to tell you for a second what that means. A few things. First, that we create a path to legalization, specifically, for me, to citizenship for many, not all, but many of the folks who have been working here, who are undocumented, who have paid taxes, who are willing to pay a fine, who are willing to learn English, who are willing to be part of this country in a constructive way. I believe that that's the best course of action for our country. I also know, as you do, that there are 3 or 4 or 5 major American industries that would not exist in the way they do without undocumented labor. The best example, perhaps, is the agriculture industry, who self-reports that 50% of its workers are undocumented, which probably means that 75% of its workers are undocumented. These are realities that we face, and I hope that as a nation that we can face them square on, without many of the recriminations, without much of the spite, and without much of the bickering that we've seen in the past. I'm actually very hopeful that we can accomplish something both on the federal level and hopefully with the states as partners to knock this issue out. And I would like to add on to something that Mr. Moore said, which I think was very important. As we go through this issue, as Americans, I hope you'll always remember this. There is a much scarier day in America than a day when everybody wants to come here. That's a day when nobody wants to come here. That is a much scarier day in our nation. You know, there's an old saying that to the victor goes the spoil. This is a blessed burden that we faced. A burden that we face because we have been a destination nation throughout our history. People from all over the world seek to come to our country. And as we know, there are many burdens in dealing with that, but it's also a blessing, and it speaks to the fact that together we have built up a society of opportunity that is unmatched among the nations of the world. And we must always persevere in preserving that. Thank you all very much.
Obviously, as the Congressman just said, immigration is a huge issue for American industry and American business. And so I'm very pleased that one of our panelists is Brad Bailey, who is the founder and CEO of the Texas Immigration Solution. The goals of this organization are to provide a voice for U.S. job creators by educating the broader community on the urgent need for immigration talent and workers by American business. And so, Brad, we're very eager to hear your solutions to the immigration issue, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for TPPF for handling this. This is a great moment for our state. That an organization with such credibility and knowledge like Texas Public Policy Foundation is taking on this tough issue. And this is a discussion that conservatives desperately need to have. So I applaud TPPF for taking the reins on this. I'm not a policy expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a restaurant owner in Houston, Texas, in Galveston County. I have had a front row seat for some time now at our nation's broken immigration policy. I've seen it up close and personal. I've seen the issue become a very divisive issue. Being in the restaurant business, you do everything from being a dishwasher to seating tables, to scrubbing floors, to being a psychologist, and so on. I've had the honor and the privilege to work shoulder to shoulder with many of our Hispanic employees that are like family to us. I've seen the importance of family values. I've seen the importance of their religion and their faith. I've seen the importance of being able to buy their first home and being able to see their child graduate from high school. These are issues that resonate in conservatism. These are issues that our party is about. However, the rhetoric on the immigration issue has hindered our ability to reach out to that group. My aha moment happened in 2011. I was running a restaurant, or it was running me, to be honest with you, but every day in our restaurant at 10:30 in the morning, before we open the doors, we have a pre-shift meeting. We call it comida. And our front of the house staff, our waiters and waitresses, and hostesses, and our back of the house staff, our kitchen, and our bus boys and dishwashers, we all sit down and we break bread together and we talk about showing up in uniform, showing up on time, put your cell phones up, greet the guests, customer service, food costs, and so on. At that time, one of my longtime employees who's worked for us for over 10 years asked to speak to me privately. I thought he was going to quit. I'm like, oh, please no. But what happened was shocked me. He asked me, he said, Brad, I know you and your family are Republicans. I see your bumper stickers on your car. I see all the events that you hold for your Republican legislators and such. But how can you be a Republican when Republicans hate Hispanics? That's not who your family is. And it just hit me in between the eyes. I put on my best stump speech, and it just went in one ear and out the other. Right after that was when our governor got attacked in the presidential debates by many people, and I started watching the process through OL's eyes, through my employees' eyes, and I really started listening to how he would take it, and how people, and to take a, you know, I live in the NASA area. Houston, we have a problem. We have a problem. Texas, we have a problem. We have alienated the fastest growing demographic in the country that has so much in common with us because of this one issue. We are being viewed as oppressive, as hateful, as elitist, and that's not a good thing. I called up friends of mine, I called up my newly elected Senator Larry Taylor and such, and said, what do I got to do to get involved? I've been running my business, but how do I get involved? How do we change this? And it says it takes business owners like you to get involved and start talking. I worked every string I had. I was honored to get selected to serve on the Republican Platform Committee in June. I was on the Immigration Subcommittee, and I'm new to this, so I'm not like you legislators. I don't have people knocking on my door all the time on issues. I can't imagine, but when that subcommittee met, we had 20 people come in that visibly and physically wanted to do harm to each other. They've been fighting on this issue for so long. They were angry, they were mad. And what we started doing is taking the weapons and please put your weapons down. Let's start talking about solutions. Texans don't complain about problems, we solve problems. How, you know, with our geographic location, how can we solve this problem? And it was amazing. all of a sudden people started talking about solutions. They stopped complaining about the problem. We took that solution that didn't have any hatred language, that didn't have the rhetoric of old, that didn't use name calling, and how can we address this? And we took it to the convention floor with 8,000 delegates at the Republican Party convention. If you're going to go for 4 days and pay your own way to the convention, you're a diehard. There's no middle-of-the-roaders there. 5 different times, the anti-immigration groups tried to take our platform, just our section, and get it ousted out of the platform. 5 different times, 2/3 of the delegates of our convention stood up and supported our solution over the rhetoric of old. I say that important to you folks here in this room today because you're wanting to get elected, you're wanting to get through primaries. There is a vocal minority that has hijacked this issue, and they're scream, 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 but there's a lot more of us that support solutions rather than rhetoric, and that's important. The media was there. The media came running in with their cameras, and we're going to point that Republicans hate Hispanics. It was going to be the front page. They were shocked. Front page of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, GOP shifts on immigration. GOP provides immigration solutions, Dallas Morning News. That's essential. The Republican National Committee got word of it. We went up there and told them what we were doing and how we did it. We just said we started talking about our conservative principles versus complaining about it. And we go to the Republican National Convention and got to the platform committee. We were behind velvet ropes, and the guys that drafted and passed the Arizona and Alabama immigration laws had a microphone and were a voting member. We beat them. For the first time in the history of the Republican National Convention, a new guest worker program is endorsed on our national platform. And it's the Texas model that did it. What I'm telling you is we have proven that conservatives, voters, activists, donors support solutions. They want our elected officials to take this ball and run with it. We now have given you, our lawmakers, and our congressional members, an immigration platform that you can run to versus run from. I'm in the hospitality business. I think the Republican Party can learn something from the hospitality business. When you walk into a restaurant and the host and hostess have their back to you, they're not paying attention to you, no one's greeting you, they're being rude to you, you're going to leave and go to another restaurant. That's what we face as a party. If we do not change this and we start talking about solutions and how we provide solutions, we are going to be a minority party for a long, long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Very well put. And thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's so important. Last but certainly not least on our panel is Brian Kennedy. Brian is the president of the very distinguished Claremont Institute, a policy institute that does research on policy issues in California. Mr. Kennedy has been with the Institute since 1989 and has written on national security affairs and California public policy issues. You've seen him write for the Wall Street Journal, for the National Review, Investors Business Daily, and other prestigious newspapers and magazines. Brian?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Steve Moore, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Steve, for all you do to defend freedom at the Wall Street Journal. It's very important. Thanks also to my old friends Chuck DeVore and Josh Trevino and all the fine work they do at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And also thank you to Brooke Rollins, who is not only pretty and smart, but knows her Texas music, as I found out from talking to her earlier. Well, our subject is immigration policy. I don't mean to be the person on the far right of this panel, but it's going to turn out a little bit that way. First, the good news on immigration. It's a big country. We have a lot of room in this country. We live on 6% of the land. There is plenty of room to grow. We are not limited, thankfully, by our natural resources. And you have demonstrated here in Texas that pro-growth policies work. And I recommend Chuck DeVore's new book on that subject to you. But then there's the bad news. Let me just lay this out as I think it deserves to be laid out as both principles and facts that ought to inform this debate. We are ill-equipped today to take in more people. And let me be clear that it is not the fault of immigrants, but of our ruling elites to sustain a regime of freedom. As a country, we are doing a horrible job turning immigrants into Americans. We are doing a horrible job of turning Americans into Americans. We have an educational system that is bad and getting worse, filled with anti-American, anti-assimilation nonsense. And we have anti-growth policies that deny to all Americans the kind of opportunity we are going to need if we are going to absorb this many new people. Because it is we Americans who have failed to preserve a regime of law and order and maintain decent borders such that we wouldn't have this immigration problem to begin with. But we do have a problem. And we can either sort that out in such a way that we have a country worth defending, or we can simply abandon constitutional government and admit that the American experiment in democracy is over. So what principles and facts must guide us? First, we live in a world of 7 billion people. We know from common sense that not just anyone can lay claim to our citizenship. We as a sovereign people must decide who comes here and who is good for us. Our founders believed that we as a people must determine who could be an American first and foremost on the character of the person in question. They wanted citizens who had the capacity for self-government. And for the most part, they were confident about these new immigrants. They believed people would come for the right reasons, and that they would come in manageable numbers, numbers that they could assimilate and absorb. And in any case, the founders knew that they needed people settling North America, much the same way we may need people to do some of the work involved. And so, although no one outside of America can lay claim to our citizenship, so long as they can become Americans, we would want them. Now, Abraham Lincoln said this best when discussing the immigrants of his day. He was giving a 4th of July speech, and he was talking about all the immigrants who were in the audience. And he knew that they couldn't trace their ancestry back to the American founding. And he said, they cannot carry themselves back into that glorious epoch, this is Lincoln talking, and make themselves feel that they are part of us. But when they look through that old Declaration of Independence, they find that those old men say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And then they feel that that moral sentiment taught in that day evidences their relation to those men, that it is the father of all moral principle in them, and that they have a right to claim it as though they were blood of the blood and flesh of the flesh of the men who wrote that declaration, and so they are. So, although not everyone has the right to be an American, we can, with the principles of the Declaration of Independence, make into Americans those who wish to join us, regardless of their race, skin color, or ethnicity. So whatever else I have to say, we as a people do not see immigrants as incapable of being Americans. But there are hard practical facts, some of which have been raised. There are today 12 to 20, maybe 30 million unidentified foreign nationals in the US. Now we know most are hardworking, and we've not done much to stop them, but we try to assimilate them at a time when our government-run education system does not adequately believe or teach the history or principles of the country, does not teach adequately math and science such that these new immigrants will be properly trained to seek anything other than the lowest paying jobs. We try to assimilate them at a time when the regulatory state of the country pursues policies that discourage investment and economic growth. What the government does promote are welfare policies that discourage the natural energy and resourcefulness of immigrants. Texas, of course, has better welfare policies and a better regulatory environment, which is one reason why you must remain vigilant in that regard, not just for the sake of the citizens of Texas, but for all those immigrants who want to be Texans. But America's immigration problem will be Texas's as well, as the potential influx of immigrants based on the policies that are being proposed in Washington are bound to impact the political and economic makeup of the state. If we use the 11 million illegal alien number and add to it the 13 million who were waiting in line around the country, that's 24 million. If you add into that number the projections of how many guest workers we will need, both unskilled and H-1B visas, and what will inevitably be the chain migration of families coming in, the number of people that will come to the United States over the next 20 years will be on the low end, 70 million new people. The high-end number gets well over 100 million new people, most of them from Latin America and Mexico. Now, it's fanciful to believe that they will not alter the makeup of this country. And of course, this is not about defending our whiteness or Anglo-ness. That is of no importance. What is of concern is whether we can stay Americans, believing in limited constitutional government. So our challenge is to craft sound immigration policy that looks first and foremost not on the economy. The economy is important. What matters the most is that we are Americans who believe in individual freedom and law and order, the very reason most immigrants come here to begin with. Thank you.
Well, that was a superb overview of the issue. Thank you, everyone, for being so concise and to the point. And Brooke, we're going to need a lot more time because there's just so many great ideas that have been floated. So let me start. I think the way we're going to proceed is, Brooke said we could have, what, 10 or 15 minutes to discuss this among ourselves, and then we'll take questions from you all. So let me start by asking you this, and if you could all, since we've got a bit of a time constraint, keep your answers pretty tight and concise. I think we can get through a lot of this. And let me start with this question. I'd like each of you to tell us if you could make 2 changes to the immigration system, 2, just 2, what would you do? And Congressman, you're now in the United States Congress, so you're going to have some of the power and authority to make some of these changes, hopefully. So we'll start with you and we'll go down the aisle this way. What are the 2 most pressing changes you believe we need to make to our immigration system to make it a more humane and more pro-economic growth system?
Of course, a few things. First, border security is important, obviously. And net migration in and out, in other words, the migration in and out of the United States with Mexico is now at 0. The net migration is at 0, right? Which is why I think this is a very opportune time to do comprehensive reform, which is the second part that I do, is find a way to humanely integrate folks with all of the qualifications that I stated earlier into our American society.
So let me just press you a little bit
Sure.
on that. I think most people would agree with you. I think the polling is starting to show that Americans' position on that has started to change. Do you see a difference between one of the hang-ups I see in Congress between the Republicans and Democrats is this issue of a path to citizenship versus a path towards legalization?
No,
and I wonder where you kind of fall on that.
And I think you've nailed the issue. I think it's all going to come down to legalization. For example, on a guest worker program, that can be a form of legalization. In other words, people are allowed to be here because they are guest workers. Legalization could also be residency, and it can be citizenship. So I think that the main debate will be exactly where are we going to go. I think that's where it'll center. And just one quick thing, that whatever our solution is, our comprehensive solution is, I believe that the DREAM Act students should absolutely have citizenship, and if we provide citizenship for their parents, they should have a much shorter path, quicker path. They literally are morally blameless in being here in the United States, and this, for many of them, is the only home they know. They know only the United States of America as their home country.
Linda, what 2 policies would you advocate?
I think I touched on them briefly on the quotas. For the unskilled workers, I would certainly advocate opening up more visas for them, with conditions though. Those quotas, because they're temporary workers, they can't consistently continue to come into the United States as guests, because then they'll have no loyalty, as Mr. Kennedy stated. So perhaps we should limit it to 5 years. In that 5-year term, they should learn English, regardless of what country they come from, and then give them a choice. Do you want to then proceed to become part of this country and give them regulations or not? Then they must exit the country and try again in 3-5 years. So we're forcing them to choose, but to our advantage, to our benefit, for the safety of our country, but our economy as well. The second thing I think I touched on were waivers. Waivers for people who have entered this country at some point in their life, or have a misdemeanor, or falsely stated something inaccurately because they were helped by someone who didn't have the authority to fill out the application. Puts them in a bind, because then they are barred from entering this country and they must ask for a waiver. Those waivers are high or difficult to meet. So we discourage the positive aspects of coming to this country and encourage them to become dependent on failures and the bad things in their life. So I would change the language and the prerequisites for them to come here. Focus on the positive. We want people to be happy. We want them to be contributing to our economy, and good Americans. Good Americans are successful people. Let's encourage them to be that.
Brad?
I think, you know, border security, but I say that with an emphasis. I think recently I've traveled across the state talking about this issue. I had no idea what I was doing at the time, but I was. And I went down to Kingsville, Texas, and met with the South Texas Property Rights Association. These individuals own massive ranches, and they're right on the border and face when migration and people are coming in, they're breaking their fences and tearing their properties up and things like that. So I really didn't know what I was getting into when I spoke to them. But when I found out that they support a guest worker program, but when I talked to the law enforcement agencies, and there were some militia people that were at this meeting as well, they support a guest worker program. Guest worker program is part of border security. Because as the law enforcement agency told me from Brooks County, if I can see them walking across the bridge with a guest worker card, and then I see people going across the river, I know who the bad guys are, I know who the good guys are. We can focus our efforts on the bad guys. So I think border security, but also making sure we understand that guest worker is part of that. Finally, I think states' rights. Our state, with over 2,000 miles of border, feels the financial impact because the federal government's not doing their job effectively. I believe that state and local law enforcement agencies should be, federal funding should go to them, you know, retired military vehicles to make sure that they're able to take. No one understands their backyard like Texans do, much better than the federal officers. But we've got to make sure that we address that. Here in Texas, we've got some great programs that are working. Texas DPS has the Operation Drawbridge, I believe, that is cameras that have cell phone thing, goes to the command center, and they're able to target quadrants where there's illegal activity going on. That's brilliant. And it's working. But we're spending millions and millions of dollars. Finally, on states' rights, I believe the state of Texas, we understand our employment needs, our agriculture needs. We understand our employment situation. We understand how we can get Texans working first, Americans working first. And I believe that any type of guest worker program should have a component where the states are able to work hand in hand with the federal government to streamline the process. We're able to make sure that the agriculture industry is getting taken care of. We're able to make sure that the high-tech industry is getting taken care of. We're making sure that the Texas Workforce Commission, if you're unemployed, that Americans are getting the first opportunity at those jobs. When it goes up to, you know, la-la land of politics in D.C., it gets lost quick.
Right?
I would start by enforcing our current laws. It's very hard to believe in any new policy if we're not going to enforce all the old policies and the old laws. Just on the point of compassion that people think about and talk about, there's a simple question of justice here. You have a lot of Hispanics in this country who are working very hard, who have come here legally, who are citizens, who are having their jobs taken away by people who come here legally, and their jobs taken away by guest worker programs. So before we start, you know, letting in more people, We need to, one, I agree, rationalize the system we currently have, but look at the justice of the people who are already here legally. And I simply don't buy the argument that there are these, you know, thousands or millions of jobs that Americans won't do. That Americans are a good, decent, hardworking people of all races and colors, that we have to have a system and an economy and a political structure that encourages growth, economic growth. And if you did that, I think we'd have plenty of jobs for Americans. What is Hispanic unemployment? What is unemployment across the board? It's pretty high. So how can you have both high unemployment and the need to bring in more workers? That just doesn't make sense on its face.
So Brian, let me ask you this question. You know, we don't know exactly what the number is for the illegal immigration in this country. I've seen estimates anywhere from 10 to 20 million. If you were advising the President or Congress on what to do about that problem, which seems to be the thorniest issue of all, what would your recommended policy be towards dealing with the 10 to 15 million people here? Should we have a deportation? Should we have a legalization? How would you handle that issue?
That's a good and fair question. I wouldn't think about deporting them. I would think about enforcing the current laws. But I would also think about...
What does that mean, though? I mean,
well, I would just make sure that you had to have a real Social Security number. But I don't like the idea, you tell I'm not a libertarian, but I don't like the idea of employers having to enforce these things either. I don't like the idea of an employer having to turn in his friends and neighbors and all the good people that work for him. But what I would like to see is some rational system whereby we could take the people who genuinely want to be Americans. I mean, Newt Gingrich had this proposal, I think, during the presidential election and the primaries, and it got kind of dismissed, but it seemed perfectly reasonable. You could have citizen commissions that looked at people who'd been here for a long time, who had proven that they want to be Americans, that they believed in what the country stands for, and find some rational way of deciding how to turn them into Americans. So I'm all for turning them into Americans. I'm simply raising the cautionary note that we do so at a time when we have an educational system that doesn't turn them into people who believe in what the country stands for.
But so you would
and that's a danger.
But you would support a path to citizenship.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you want to come to the United States, or you're in the United States, and you want to follow our laws and believe that all men are created equal and live under our system of laws and defend the country, which we know millions of immigrants do, we want you. As I say, it's a big country. But we're not doing anybody any favors by allowing both legal immigration and guest workers and illegal immigration that suppress the wages of people who come here legally.
Sure.
It's an extremely corrupt system.
Let me ask this question to you all, and then if we have some time, we're running out of time, but I think I've heard agreement from all of you, but I don't want to make any assumptions, that you all agree that we should increase the number of visas for legal immigration. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So I think there's agreement on that. It sounds like the issue is really, how do we decide who, right? And what do we do about the ones who aren't here? Do we have time left? I know we're running against the clock. Do we have time for any questions from the audience, or should we? One question. Who would like to ask the one question and make it a good one? Anybody would like to ask one question? Stand up, because I probably won't be able to see your hand. Okay, in the back I see a gentleman waving his hand. You, sir. And wait till the microphone gets here.
Congressman, this will sound like a harsh question. It's not meant to be. It's just the only way to say it.
That's all right.
Moved here from Chicago 2 years ago. Roughly 500,000 Latinos in Chicago. And the Chicago Democrat machine, who controls 100% of elected offices, have done everything they can to segregate the Latino community, keep them in a grieved interest group. In many schools, they won't even teach English, and they want to make sure their only method of surviving is handouts from the Chicago Democrat machine. How do you, being someone who understands a far different system here, deal with guys who really want to keep the Latino community an aggrieved minority who have to live off the handouts of the Democrat government Leviathan?
Let me kind of, that's a great question. Before you answer it, and we're going to end on this, so let me kind of hone in on what I'd like each of you to answer on this. Is it, a lot of my friends who are conservatives say, gee, we can't continue to allow immigrants in because the Democrats are going to win every election between now and forever. And I guess the question is, and this might be an especially tough question for you to ask, Congressman, because you're a Democrat, but are Latinos, do Republicans have a hope of winning the Latino vote if they change their policies and their mindset? And I'd like each of you to answer that question.
Well, I guess let me take the question. And first, you know, I'm not from Chicago, I'm from Texas, so I don't know what happens.
I'm from Chicago.
He's from Chicago and you're from Chicago, okay. But I said this, and Josh Trevino and I were at the panel for the Texas Tribune panel a few months ago, and I said the same thing. I disagree with your premise. There are folks who say that, for example, those in the pro-life movement never want to end the abortion issue because they want people to vote Republican. I don't believe that. I believe if they could do away with choice now, they would do that. I also don't think that there are a group of Democratic politicians who want to keep people poor and dumb so that they can keep getting them to vote Democrat. I just don't subscribe to that at all.
I get asked, you're Latina, why are you a Republican? They don't like you, why are you there? Well, I had good mentorship who taught me conservative values at a young age, how to be a Republican for opportunity. And I don't care if anyone likes me, Texas Republicans love me, and that's all I care. Texas has wonderful opportunities for Latinos. We have in-state tuition for the undocumented that is educating a young population that are going to be paying into our tax system. That's going to benefit all of us. We further have 10% admission that's going to be educating young Latinos, and Texas has the largest graduation of Latinos from high school. We love Latinos. These are policies pushed forth by Republican people like you all. This is an opportunity for us in Texas to lead not only in policies that will give us future Republicans, but to help us in the immigration issue.
Right. I think this is a great question because this is, the immigration policy connects directly with the immigration politics, more so than ever. And I have found in being a restaurateur, talking about this issue with elected officials and Republicans, when we host them, they'll tell you behind closed doors, hey, I agree with you 110%, you know, and then they get a microphone in a rally and it's, so that's frustrating, but this is a partisan issue because they are being told what your friends say, that if you do act on this, they're going to be voted out. And that is where I believe having conservative credentials and being able to be involved, you're able to talk people through this. You know, Hispanic outreach is a very, very essential portion of what we got to do. It's also with Asian Americans, African Americans, and so on. But if you look around this room right now, we need to do gringo inreach. We need to talk to each other about this issue. And we need to honestly dispel the myths and the lies and the rhetoric that surrounds this issue that's not even close to being factual. I know many of you in this room will be shocked to hear that in political circles, you know, lies are told and, you know, half-truths are mentioned. But on this issue especially, that's one case. So I think it is a partisan issue, and I think being conservative is very, very important. Being an independent, nonpartisan group, I think you won't get an honest answer from the elected officials.
Brian, I want you to answer that question, but I want to ask you something else related to it. You're the Californian in the room. And I wonder, you know, you look at Texas. Texas seems to work. California seems to be our most dysfunctional state. I mean, at the Wall Street Journal, we call California the Greece of North America. And I wonder, and it's interesting, and it seems to me that immigration is handled much more effectively here in the state of Texas than it is in California. Is that true? And can California learn much from the way Texas assimilates its immigrants versus California?
You know, that's a great question, and a good question probably to end on, but Peter Scarry wrote a book probably a decade ago where he described the Hispanics in San Antonio and the Hispanics in Los Angeles. And the Hispanics in San Antonio had come here because they wanted to be Texans. They were fans of the cowboys. They had pickup trucks. They wore cowboy boots. They had gun racks. They liked what was Texas. I know it's an exaggeration, but they liked what was Texas. Whereas in California, you know, people are surfing and they're wearing flip-flops and, you know, they're eating granola and it's all just craziness. And so the Hispanics looked at all those people and they thought, really, do we want to be these kind of people? No. And so they retained more or less many of their folk ways, and they were more easily, Peter Scarry, the sociologist, thought, radicalized, or at least kept in a way of thinking that radicalized is the wrong word, that they were kept thinking more in terms of their Mexicanness or Latinness or Hispanicness, if that's even a word, rather than thinking of themselves as an American. And in California we have, there's a charter school in California, and I mention this because you're never going to do this in Texas, but we'll do it in California because, you know, we don't watch these things as nearly as carefully as you do in Texas, but we have a charter school in California called the Academia, La Academia de las Semillas. And there they don't have the kids, they're very loose on the speaking of English. They overtly don't have them say the Pledge of Allegiance. And they look to more truly radical forms of history from parts of Mexico that even people in Mexico don't study. And you could see that an educational system in California that doesn't care about turning someone into an American will turn someone into somebody else, more a product of what this gentleman was asking as an original question.
Yeah, and Brian, I would just say that, to that and retort that I think part of the problem you guys had in California was Pete Wilson, who passed Prop 187, and as you remember, and I was there in California from 92 to 96, ran commercials all over California with images of Mexican immigrants crossing the border in San Diego and said, they keep coming. That was California politics. And I think that'll do it. You know, that'll do it.
So here we are, we're just finally all getting along. Yeah. You have to bring that up.
Well, but I do want to say, I think to the credit of all Texans, is that we never took that road.
Right.
It never got quite like that in Texas.
Great point.
And that's one of the reasons that we haven't had the same problems.
I mean, you look at California policy today, and the only reason it matters is, as California gets worse, it's the Californians come to Texas. Because you don't stop people at the Texas border who want to become Texans. And the bad policies from the rest of the country when it comes to immigration will bleed over into Texas eventually.
But you actually have more folks coming into Arizona than you do California or Texas.
You, with all your economic opportunity, God bless you, will draw more people here. Inevitably so. And so you in Texas want people who are Americans. That's all I'm saying, and I think we agree on that.
So, Brooke, I told you 100 times we needed more time for this session because this has been a fantastic panel. I would certainly close this by saying that on my wall, I think you'll all appreciate this, on my wall in my Wall Street Journal office, I have an old New Yorker cartoon, and it's a picture of two Indians standing behind a bush, and the Mayflower is coming into the bay, and the one Indian turns to the other and says, it looks like we're going to need an immigration policy. And of course, we've been debating that for the last 500 years. This is a critical issue. I don't know about you, but I learned a lot. I thought we had a lot of really fantastic ideas. So please give one more nice round of ovation to our